views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Get ready for a game changer. Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, Sarah will bring you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Now here's your host, Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to Conscious Business Radio on the Transformation Talk Radio Network. I moderated a panel this past week on engineered healthcare and what it's going to be 10 to 20 years out with. It was great. It was with the U.S. Competitiveness Council, and it's with some of the greatest minds in the country. One of the themes that were shared consistently through the conference is that the pace of change is rapidly accelerating. In fact, they believe, and many people believe, that the next 5 years will equal what has been discovered over the last 100 years. I mean, think about that for a minute. 100 years ago, we were in a horse and buggy, and now what we have today. So if that's the case, we are talking about huge disruption. And I think we've all seen that already with fall of traditional media companies. They're really struggling. Phones are displacing cameras and computers. Uber has mostly displaced taxis, and we're going to get self-driving cars pretty soon. What will the future look like? Will doctors as we know them be displaced? They could be. Will universities be uprooted and turned into something we have yet to even experience? What will our entertainment be? Virtual reality environments where we become part of the experience? Will we be playing tennis against a friend in Japan using virtual reality and hyper-realistic holograms? Well, I think the answer to all that is yes. I don't know what shape and form it'll take. Your guess is as good as mine. But this stuff is happening, and it's coming faster and faster. According to Dr. Julie Williamson, businesses need to fully embrace disruption if they want their business or organization to participate in a meaningful way into the future. In fact, the average life cycle of Fortune 500 businesses has shortened from 50 years to 15 years in the last 2 decades. This means that embracing disruption is not just a fun exercise, but a means of survival. So I am inviting Dr. Julie Williams today to discuss what she means by embracing disruption. She also talks about what the current climate is in business and why she has focused her studies on this. In fact, she just wrote a book called Matter, Move Beyond the Competition, Create More Value, and Become the Obvious Choice. So we're going to discuss that with her and how she sees that, how businesses can embrace change and disruption. But before we do that, we're going to play an interview with Shalom Pharmacy. I want to emphasize how great this pharmacy is. They actually are located in New York, but they're very different than most pharmacies I've ever been to. They work directly with your doctor to help patients come up with drugs that work for them. Of course, they have all the normal stuff that you can get at any other pharmacy, but they compound drugs and they work with your doctor to create things that'll work for you. With so many people addicted to medications, there's over 100 million people. You probably know somebody, your sister, your brother, your parents, addicted to pain medications. It's become a major epidemic, and he is determined to help these people, and he's figured out a way to decrease this cost. He creates drugs that will just be directly to the area where you have pain so that you won't have the addictive effects that come with so many of the mass-oriented drugs that are out there. And he'll work with your doctor to figure that out. And if there's certain things that they think you're going to be addicted to, he'll create other things. He does much more than that as well, as far as compounding drugs, helping people that can't swallow medications, coming up with alternatives like lollipops and different things. But he's also very active in his community, trying to educate people on how to keep people from being addicted to drugs. He's a phenomenal person. If you're a clinic that's in a different state, he can work with you. He just needs to get licensed in that state. But I would recommend, if you don't have a good resource for this, that I'd talk to him, because he will work with you, and it's very affordable compared to most services out there. So I'm going to play that interview with him first on his phenomenal stuff that he does over there. And then we're going to get to Dr. Julie Williamson on change and disruption. Hi, Shalom. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks. Nice to be with you.
You are doing something different with your pharmacy, and people were doing it more before, but people stopped doing it. Pharmacies have stopped doing this, but you're still doing it and making it affordable. You're doing something called compounded medications, and it really helps people. What are compounded medications?
Basically, compounding medications is custom-made drugs. Sometimes drugs go off market, and we source the ingredients. It's basically the most classic practice of any pharmacy. That was our before manufacturing became available. Every pharmacy used to compound medications, concoctions, but now everything is ready-made. So certain dosage forms for patients, lollipops or drinks or suppositories, we continue to make that.
Why do people need this for their health? Because they stopped doing it because of it gets down to my whole McDonald's drive-through on everything. I think that we're just trying to cram people into the same process, and all these people fall out. This is an example of where we have this manufacturing process go on, and all these people are falling out of that process, and we need people to still do these things. Why do people need this for their health?
Well, it's personalized medications. It's not one size fits all like the manufacturers have us, and it's more targeted therapy. What we focus on is more of topical preparations. We don't do sterile compounding. You need special equipment for that. What we do is like pain creams a lot of the time, because people are addicted to pain medications, and when they take medications by mouth, there's a lot of side effects that can happen, but this avoids it. So if you have lower back pain, you're applying the cream directly to your back. It doesn't have to go through your entire system. So you're getting a targeted therapy that's customizable for your condition, and you're avoiding side effects because you're applying directly where the pain is, let's say. Does that make sense?
Every cell in your body isn't getting it that doesn't need it. You're just doing it directly. And so your body it's a targeted area in your body, so your body's not being overdosed in a way. It's not overdose, that's probably the wrong word, but other areas of your body that doesn't need it won't get it.
Exactly.
It's healthier.
It's much healthier. We actually have excellent results, because if people call themselves for refills and they want more, I'm assuming that it's working well and they need more relief.
So why are pharmacies around the country no longer offering these services? Because it seems like it would be so beneficial.
Many pharmacies are reducing, if completely going out of compounding niche, because of reimbursement cuts, and the insurances really control of what we can do and what we can't. So many insurances stop paying for it altogether. But we continue to try to innovate every time and reinvent ourselves by providing different types of compounding that are affordable, and we could still stay in business and still provide that good personalized service to the patient. It's one patient at a time. It's specific to that patient.
So you've devised a plan to keep it affordable so that people can actually do this, where a lot of pharmacies are just unable to do that, or these mass pharmacies, they just can't. They're not equipped to do these things. But how does this affect patients and doctors? I would assume doctors that know about you and what you're doing would love this. So how does it affect the patients and doctors who are trying to care for them who cannot get this anymore?
Well, that's why we get a lot of referral sources, because we're not expensive. We are affordable, and when the patient's getting the relief, the doctor looks happy, and he's happy, and the patient's happy, and we're happy that we're actually getting something right to the patient that's beneficial to their health. Because the most important thing is patient-centered approach, and the whole triad relationship, like a triangle. Everybody's happy in that relationship.
Well, is the word getting around to doctors that, hey, this is great, and this is a service that people need? And I mean, there's other things that people, I know you were telling me about people who can't swallow pills. You do different things there as well. Like, what other things can you do that really helps people that other pharmacies just can't, because you're not using these big manufacturing processes when it doesn't work for you?
Right. So we're small, so we have a lot of less overhead, And a lot of doctors recommend us to their friends and other doctors because they're seeing that we're on time, we do the deliveries on time, the patient's getting their drugs.
But what other problems are there? I know you were talking about being able to swallow, and people are being forced to have these medications even though they can't swallow. I don't know what they're going to do in those cases. And you're talking about applying pain medication. Now, if you're doing pain medication just to your back, does that help in, like you're saying, side effects? So many people are addicted to pain medications. Would that keep the addiction effect minimized?
The theory behind it that we put in practice, that we see the results, is when a patient is using our creams, they're lessening their pill burden. So if they're taking a lot of tablets per day for pain relief, now they're taking much less because they don't need it as much as they're getting that relief. And slowly we see that they're weaning off their pain medications. And those that cannot swallow, let's say we can make it into a drink. I've made troches, which is like candies, so people can suck on and get the drug absorbed through their cheeks. I mean, we've done suppositories for people who cannot, who vomit all the time. They cannot hold medications down, so we made suppositories for certain conditions. So it's really personalized. We'll get a request, and we try to tailor-make it to that patient, to that problem.
Well, how do you still offer these services? I know that you try to keep these profitable or try to keep these affordable, but how do you offer these services when a lot of other pharmacies are not able to? And I know there's the mass, big, huge ones. They just probably don't want to bother with it. How are you doing it?
We are able to source the raw ingredients at a much cheaper rate because of our volume. And we have a good relationship with our wholesalers, and we're part of different organizations. So that gives us a better buying power. And that way we could forward the savings to the patient.
Well, I love what you're doing. I think I would think there'd be a lot of people in that industry that would be very passionate about this need. People need this. I know I did a show on addiction to pain medication and how severe that problem is across our country. It's a really bad issue that's going on right now. And I think this could be an excellent solution to a major problem that we have. How can people reach you?
They could call us at the pharmacy. They could fax. Email. We try to be very available. We're on Facebook. You need our phone number?
Yeah, give me your phone number, and I'll also put it on the radio page because this is excellent. If you're addicted to pain medications, now tell me, if you're addicted to a pain medication, do you work with the patient to slowly get them on not addicted by switching to a cream with their doctor? You work with their doctor. Yes. And the medications to get them off this addiction.
Right. It's a triad relationship. So we're constantly in contact with their doctors and try to figure out a way how, they could use our therapy and complement to their ongoing therapy. We're seeing results. It's a very slow process. Pain addiction is a very big problem in the city right now. A lot of kids are addicted to heroin because it's cheaper than any other drugs. So it's a very challenging problem, and it's really close relationship with doctors is what really differentiates. A lot of doctors call me on my cell phone and ask me questions. What can I do for this patient? What can I do for that patient? And it's just our willingness to really work with the patient and the doctor. I think that sets us apart.
Well, and I think getting on this whole McDonald's drive-through thing and realize that we need to do what's right for patients and start offering, we know how to do this, start offering these kind of services to people, and you're such a model of what you can do. Give me your phone number. We'll get that out to the world, and then I will have your information on the radio page so that people can contact you. Now, you can only sell in New York, right?
At the moment, we're licensed in New York State, but if we have a lot of requests that's out of state, we will get the appropriate licenses for that. And our phone number is 718-253-4900, and our fax number is 718-253-4905.
Excellent. Thank you, Shalom. I will get that up on the radio page, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I think you're doing a great service for the world.
Right. One person at a time. We're very passionate about it, and we're looking for good talent. If people are looking for a job, we want people that want to grow. We're always looking for good talent.
I'm hoping you enjoyed that conversation, or at minimal, you learned something about pain medication and how we can help solve the addiction problem. If you have a loved one or anyone that you know that's in that circle of addiction, Shalom Pharmacy is somebody that can really help working with their doctor. But now let's get to the topic of disruption and how corporations need to embrace disruption if they want to thrive and do something meaningful into the future and not be taken out by their competition. So let's welcome Dr. Julie Williamson to the program.
Hi, Julie. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me.
You wrote a book about matter, building businesses that matter, but you had a problem that you were trying to tackle with this book. And what is that problem?
Yeah, Sarah, when my colleague Peter Sheehan and I started thinking about putting this book out on the market, one of the things that we really wanted to do was to encourage companies and the people inside of them to really orient towards all of the disruption and the turbulence that's happening in the market with a degree of courage and optimism and curiosity in terms of specifically how they could matter more to their communities, to their investors, to their employees, and of course to their customers. One of the problems that we were finding in our consulting practice as we went into organizations all around the world is that in the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a huge internal focus on how you drive cost out of the business, how you improve processes. Those are all good things to do, but they don't end up creating directly more value out in the market and across your value chain. And we think that's where companies really need to focus and throw their resources. So we wanted to provide a way to give people a map, let's say, to get out there and start creating that kind of value, the kind of value that makes you matter more.
Well, the world has just changed so much, and the marketplace is changing so significantly and so rapidly. You need a tool to be able to, a model to be able to manage that massive, rapid market change on a regular basis and be able to reach the client, right? Because even marketing has changed.
Absolutely. Marketing has changed significantly in the last 10 years or so. But I think one of the changes is that marketing can no longer be a silo that sits off by itself as a black box. Everybody in the organization is in the business of marketing your products and your services, right? And so how do people have the right understanding of really what your company does and also who your target market might be and who your suppliers are and who your distributors are? I think there's a higher obligation internally in the company for everyone to be able to speak effectively to those sorts of things so that when you show up in the market, there's a lot of cohesion and consistency in your messaging.
Well, one thing that you were saying, and I want to talk about this now, is that people think that these huge companies are going to be stable and be around forever. They used to be around for, 50, 100 years, and now that cycle is reduced to 15-year cycles, and that might even shorten again. What are you seeing there? Because that would cause a lot of fear in some ways with executives and with the leaders trying to figure out what to actually do.
I think that if you wrap your head around the idea of a life cycle of 15 to 20 years, let's say directionally for a company, or even potentially for a product or a service, right, that you're offering, then you should have a fire lit under you to matter as much as you can during the time that you're there, right? How do you create as much value as possible? Because you're going to go forward into a new iteration, whether it's another company or a reemergence of the company that, has a 15-year lifespan, but then gets reborn as something else, right? Because of all of the changes that have happened in its environment. Continually pushing forward out onto what we call the edge of disruption, I think can set you up really well to start looking at a life cycle rather than, 100 years, 50 years, 100 years for the life cycle of a company. What's the 15 to 20 year cycle that you want to go through to continue to find new ways to create value?
And just manage that cycle, knowing that's the reality of it, and be happy that you have the dollars, the capital to be able to reinvest into the next cycle, right?
Exactly, yeah. And how exciting is that, right? To be able to make as big of an impact as you can in those 15 or 20 years, and then flip that into something that reinvents the organization.
Well, the other thing that you talked about is embracing disruption. What do you mean by that? Because disruption can be looked at as a negative thing, but we're not really talking disruption. Well, change causes disruption, right?
I think, yes. I try not to qualify disruption as positive or negative. I think it simply is, right? And the way that you choose to orient towards it will drive your results. And so we talk about moving to what we call the edge of disruption, which is where you take all of the capabilities that you have and what you've done really well, but you also have the perspective and the relationships to know what's going on outside of your organization. And you can bring that together to create new sources of value to matter in different ways to your entire value chain. And I think, unfortunately, what we see sometimes is that people are very narrow in their perspective. They only are looking internally. I'll give you the example. I'm sure you've seen this. You go to an industry conference and people are there and there's great information being shared and it's, fascinating stuff. And there's people sitting out in the hallway on their phones talking to their teams back at the home office the whole conference, right? So why even be there? They're not developing a perspective that really helps them to feel comfortable and confident with the disruption because they're so focused on what's happening internally. So I think there are ways to mitigate the fear and to mitigate the negative aspects by being aware and knowing what's going on and being excited about that.
Well, and understand that innovation always brings disruption. Anytime there's paradigm shifts and different ways of looking at things, the change itself is going to bring disruption because the people who are embracing the change will be excited and will be moving fast, but there's always people who are negatively affected by the change. There's somebody that loses market share or somebody. So there's always going to be disruption that people don't like.
Yep.
And so you're going to have to learn how to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, with the level of speed and transparency that we see in every industry, in every geography, in the work that we do, there is no safe harbor from disruption, I guess I would say, right? So you may as well figure out how to embrace it and how to move towards it rather than trying to resist it. Because if you develop the capability to absorb disruption, then you will go through those life cycles that we were talking about before in much better shape than if you are developing the capability to try to prevent disruption. I once worked for a CIO who said I think it was right around when the iPhone was coming out and people wanted to start using the iPhone as their work phone. And there were a lot of questions about security and everything. And the CIO said to me, Julie, in the history of CIOs, no CIO has ever prevented a technology from coming into the organization. So I'm not even going to try.
Well, that's good. That's a good way to look at it in that way, because people almost push back harder when you try to keep something from happening.
Yeah.
But now let's talk about incremental change versus leaps. Now, should people be looking at incremental change or leaps when we're talking about these changes going so quickly?
I think that people need to look at both. And part of that is because we always say change is slow until it isn't. And then it seems like it came out of nowhere, right? It's the Grammy-winning artist that people say, oh, she came out of nowhere when she's really been on the scene for 15 years, right? Working hard to try to make that big splash. It's the small changes, it's the small efforts that eventually make a really big impact. We saw Uber's been around over 10 years, right? It was out there on the fringe, on the periphery, just making small changes in certain markets, kind of chipping away at the taxi model. And then all of a sudden one day, it was like the whole world changed, right? And everybody was using Uber.
The tipping point. Enough people know it where all of a sudden it just takes off.
Yeah, but it's rare that something just comes out of nowhere. As a matter of fact, I would suggest that I've never seen something just literally come out of nowhere. So by paying attention to the incremental changes, you can be set up as well as possible for when that tipping point happens and something really takes off.
Well, do you need people who are more visionary, people who are more acutely aware of those things in your organization? Because that takes a different skill set too. And I guess I'm more aware in certain areas than other areas. There's certain areas I'm really keened into where all the changes are going. I'm way on the edge. And then in other areas, I'm way behind and I don't care, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. You can't know everything, right? The world is too big and you can't know everything. But that's why it's so important, especially in big organizations, that there is cross-group communication and interaction. And we talk about breaking down silos and everything else. Silos do serve a function, right? They help you consolidate your functional expertise and do some certain things from a career perspective. So silos aren't all bad. But you have to have open interaction and dialogue that's happening across them so that people can connect the dots. Even internally, to your point, often people don't know everything that's going on. And really, you can't and you shouldn't because you have a job to do. But how do you create in your company an environment that supports that cross-functional interaction?
We need to take a short break, and we'll be back in a moment.
Are you ready for a game changer? Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Sarah brings you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Tune in to Business Game Changers Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Were you hurt on the job or in a car accident and now struggling with pain? Shalom's Pharmacy can help. We work with you and your doctor to meet your specific needs. We also work with your doctor to keep you from developing an addiction. At Shalom's Pharmacy, we listen to your needs, get to know you, and provide the kind of personal advice that has a positive impact on your well-being. Shalom's Pharmacy, your partner in good health, located at 1106 Avenue K in Brooklyn, New York. Give us a call, 718-253-4900.
And we are back. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to Business Game Changers, and we're talking to Dr. Julie Williamson about embracing change and disruption in your business if you want to survive going forward, because the changes that are coming rapidly, and they're not going to stop. So we are going to get back into that, but before we get back into that, I want to remind you, you can go to my website, sarahwestall.com, to hear any of my episodes. I have close to 130 episodes and articles up there now. So you can go there, or you can also listen to me at 3 p.m. Eastern Time on WBLQ, which plays in New York, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. It's 12:30 a.m. And I'm also now on the Global Star satellite network, which airs nationwide. So you can get that as well. So I'm excited about just joining that. And I think there will be a lot more listeners coming to the program. And of course, we're on Transformation Talk Radio 7 days a week, which is a phenomenal network that I'm really proud to be part of. So now let's get back to our interview with Julie Williamson.
Well, you also talked about adding more value. And, that's almost an exhausting, when people hear that, they're just, more value, because we have to do things at such a low cost right now. We've been beaten up to the point, and the competition is so fierce that people are trying to reduce to the bare bones, and now we got to create more value. I agree with this statement, but how can people embrace this and understand it and not feel resentment towards this concept?
I think there's a couple of things. You make a really good point, which is this internal focus on cost reduction so that we can drive commoditized pricing in all of the things that we do, right? It's almost insanity in business, right? And that's actually, I would suggest, really exhausting and a little demoralizing. What's exciting is to say, how can we create more value and how can we do less better? So we always say we need to do more with less. Maybe we should try and do less better. And, I think Elon Musk gave us a great example of that recently when it was reported in the news that dealerships were discounting Teslas to try and clear the lots, right? And he kind of, by all reports, went ballistic on that and was like, no, price is what it is. This is a highly valued item. It's not a commoditized item. And so we're going to price it that way and we're going to sell it that way. And you need to figure out how to up your selling game so that you can sell it at the right price point, right? So it's a mental shift. We have to break those old paradigms of what it means to sell our particular product or service in a way that maintains the value that's associated with it. And we also have to figure out how to connect with customers from both a marketing and a practical perspective to create the brand value and the product value that demands or that commands a higher price point.
A lot of times that might mean changing the product, don't you think? Because you can easily get caught up in the game of price competition, because you can suddenly get to a point where you can't sell your product unless you start cutting costs. So you have to rethink your product, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think you have to rethink your product. I think you also have to rethink your supply chain. You have to rethink your distribution. All of the different areas in your value chain are opportunities to create different sources of value. I think Patagonia is doing a brilliant job with some of that in terms of how they are exploring new and different fabrics, materials. They've just come out with a new wetsuit that doesn't use neoprene for the first time since wetsuits were invented, right? It uses a more sustainable material, so they've upended their supply chain there. You look at companies like that, and people are willing to pay more for what is often thought of as a fairly commoditized product. Why would you buy a Patagonia fleece instead of an off-brand one? In part, it's because the quality is there and they stand behind their supply chain and their distribution model.
Well, brand in clothing is absolutely massive, right? So creating a brand is very important.
And the authenticity behind it, right?
Yeah. And so they're looking at changing their product. They're looking at being really innovative with their materials, giving customers a different proposition through changing their product. That was an example of that. What's an example of changing your distribution or how you other parts of it?
Yeah, that's sometimes a little bit trickier. To your point, there's always some people who are unhappy with disruption. And I think especially when you look at distribution models that are being unsettled because of, in particular, technology. A great one is when you look at jewelry. There was, for a long time, a belief that people wouldn't buy jewelry online. They would always go through a jeweler because they want to go in and try it on and see it. And I think companies like Blue Nile have been able to raise a really effective challenge to that and to really disrupt the assumptions about that particular distribution model and whether you really need bricks and mortar and that kind of an experience. So how a jeweler now competes with an online presence like a Blue Nile, they have to start creating a different kind of shopping experience that makes it valuable to come into the store and do your shopping there in a different way. That's a model that's being significantly disrupted right now.
Paradigm shifts and rethinking how you're doing things. Why do you believe that strategic partnerships are more important than ever? What does that mean, and why is that so important?
Yeah, I think that strategic partnerships are critical. It almost goes back to our earlier conversation about even internally, you can't know everything and you can't do everything, right? Strategic partnerships give you that opportunity to continue to find those new sources of value, but to do it in a way that both distributes the risk and maximizes the potential, because you probably can't do it all inside your own organization. A great example, if you want to solve a problem that requires a partnership approach, one of the examples that we used in Matter in the book is Global Healthcare Exchange, GHX. They're in the healthcare industry and supply chain. A few years ago, I'm going to say 2 years ago now, they realized, together with others in the industry, that there's a huge problem with tracking what are called implantables, the devices that go in your body, like a pacemaker or an artificial hip or a knee. I won't give you all the gory details behind it, but that's a problem that no one company is capable of solving. So they really needed to create a partnership with about 6 or 7 different companies in the supply and distribution chain to say, how can we solve this industry level problem that matters more to patients who are having implantables put in during surgery, right?
All the different industries, all the different subjects are merging, right? Computer science with engineering, with healthcare, with all these things are merging, all these different disciplines.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do you find the right partners? How do you know that they're going to be the right fit for you and that they're not going to take you over, that they're trustworthy?
That's a great question. Nobody's asked me that question. That's a really good question. Hemingway once said that the best way to know if somebody is trustworthy is to trust them.
Until you get hosed over and then don't trust them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Hemingway was a pretty smart guy. But I do think that we have another case study in the book from DPR, which is in the construction industry. And one of the things that they've done is kind of rewritten the rules about who they take on as clients, how their contractors are treated, all these sorts of things. And I think you look at them selecting clients as strategic partners, right? People who they want to work with and who want to work with them. And they do it by being very clear about their standards, right? This is what we're willing to do. This is how we're willing to work. And this is how we want this relationship to feel. And if you're not willing to step up to those standards, then it's probably not a contract that we're going to be successful with anyway. So let's not even start, right? So I think being clear about your standards and being able to communicate them and be articulate about them is a great way to find strategic partners and also to set up a strategic partnership right from the beginning with clarity and discipline that creates trust.
But what do you do if you're struggling to get clients? And so I think people feel that they're not necessarily in a place to be demanding anything. They're just begging for customers. That's a sad place to be. That's maybe because they didn't innovate soon enough, or they're in the dying cycle. And there's so many companies that are in that cycle and they are trying to innovate out of it. What do you do in that stage?
Yeah, I think that if you are in that situation, then it's time for a real sort of gut check, right? About whether the products and services that you're delivering to whatever customer base you have is the right match. And if it isn't, then you need to do something dramatic and take one of those leaps that, we talked more about incremental, I think, earlier, but what's the leap that you need to take to end up in a situation where you are delivering something that people value enough that you're having a different kind of conversation when it comes to them buying or engaging with you in any kind of partnership or customer relationship. And I will tell you that fundamentally there's a degree of courage and optimism and curiosity that's missing from organizations sometimes, because they are in that, you called it the dying cycle, right? But they're in that downward slide. It's hard to take a big courageous step in that moment. But, what have you got to lose, right? If you see the end in sight and you're just, trying to claw your way back from it, that's probably not a bad moment to really retrench and try to take a big step forward. But I get it. It's hard. And I'm not trying to say that none of these things are easy. If they were, we would all be doing them and we'd all be, doing fabulous.
Well, I mean, if you can think about it, there's a lot of people in that situation. We know that huge industries are going through massive changes and they don't really know how to go about it. For example, let's look at journalism. We just got done seeing this election where journalism wasn't quite journalism. Everybody had an extreme view and had their opinion. And so where could you go to just get an objective look at the candidates? That was very difficult to do. And so what happened to journalism? What happened to just talking about the issues? But you're seeing that I was just reading a report this morning that the ad revenues on major newspapers, again, is taking a dive. The major networks are taking a huge hit. But then there's alternative media, and they're not really making that much money on ad revenue either. So the whole industry is going through this huge change, and it's affecting our entire country.
Yep.
They're going to opinion-based coverage because they get more listeners that way, because they're just struggling to survive because they're trying to keep their ad revenue up. But then that's hurting our country.
Yeah, I think, there are so many deeply embedded assumptions in journalism about what's pure and what's right and what's the business that we're in. Are we in the business of selling opinions or of selling objectivity? And then there's a question of, what is true objectivity? And I think challenging those assumptions is incredibly hard because sometimes it's all about your identity, right? The identity of a journalist is tied up in a lot of those assumptions. But you've got to be able to have that courage to test the assumptions that have defined your entire industry and say, what else? How else could we think about this? What does it really mean to be a journalist? How is that valued by readers, by citizens of the United States, whatever that might look like? And what's the shifting value proposition?
And that's a hard thing to answer right now, right? Because I think they're going after the customers so that they can get readership, listenership up. And so they're going to this extreme viewpoint. But that's the downward cycle that they're actually promoting in a lot of ways. And it's a hard catch-22 when whole industries and paradigm shifts are happening.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that example, it's a great example, Sarah, too, by the way, is if your assumption is that we need mass readership, then you're going to go in a certain direction. But if your assumption is we can create more value with a smaller segment of readership that's willing to pay more for what we do, right, then you're challenging the commoditization, essentially, of the news, right? So does it have to appeal to 300 million people? Or is it okay if it appeals to 1 million people and we target that particular group, right? So the assumption that journalism has to be broadly accessible and broadly acceptable, I think, is probably something worth challenging.
Yeah, we're looking at more niche markets now, and so the big mass-oriented places, media companies are struggling to maintain what they've always done, and it's not really working right now because customers are going towards their niches. But now they aren't necessarily wanting huge, extreme views either. So it's an interesting landscape, and we'll see it changing, I am sure, over the next decade and watch it all play out. You also talk about you need to care more than just about profits. But you need to do it with sincerity. So talk about that.
Yeah, and I think with also congruence to your strategy. So when you think about especially the short-term profit focus that has been really pushed in the last 15 to 20 years, I think that was hugely detrimental to businesses, particularly in the United States. And I think that companies are now starting to shift around to taking a longer view. And how do we really create a sustainable growth where we have the flexibility to be innovative and creative and to take some intelligent risks? So I think that you have to look beyond, the 30, 60, 90-day windows and see what's the impact that you as a brand and as an organization are having. What's the value you're delivering to your customers, but also what's the impact that you're having on your community, however you define that. The community might be a geography or it might be a market segment. It might be a lot of different things in today's world. But what's your community and how are you impacting them in a way that will help support your growth in the long term?
Well, so the quarterly results is being affected by this. Wall Street, who are making everybody jump through hoops to get their quarterly results looking good, is really killing innovation. And we have to look at it from a different model, because if the cycle is really 15, 20 years, you cannot be looking at quarterly results constantly, right? And so the world is changing beyond that. And so if we don't look at the companies different, then we're going to create our own demise.
Yeah, I think if you look by means of example at what Adobe did a few years ago, they went to Wall Street and said one of the most optimistic things I think a CFO can say, when the CFO went and said, hey, our numbers are going to go down for about 6 quarters because we are fundamentally changing our business.
That's great.
Now
that's courage.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, that's fortitude. And that's exactly what happened. And they made a huge investment in completely retooling their business. They migrated all of their customers over to cloud solutions. And today their stock, when he made that move, their stock had been sleeping at about the low 30s. It ended up going down into the 20s. I don't think it went below 20. But today it's right around 100. So they placed a big bet. They went and they managed Wall Street's expectations, and it paid off for them in, directionally 4 to 5 years.
So now they didn't get creamed by Wall Street. I mean, they did a little bit. They lost their shares, lost 50%, right? That's 50. Exactly. 30 to 20 is 50% of their value. So they had to make the courage to go, okay, our share price is going to drop in half, and we are still going to do this because this is the right thing to do long term.
Yep, exactly.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and I think it's a really powerful one. A lot of people don't know Adobe beyond PDFs, and you don't really pay for PDFs, so I think a lot of people wonder how they make money. But
sure.
They make money by selling some really great software,
Photoshop and all those.
To primarily creatives and other industries. But they did a massive transformation internally and externally.
Well, you have a concept that I think is really profound. You say great companies invest in the health of their entire industry. And what does that mean? Because you would think that great companies are so competitive that they're just, stepping all over their competitors, but not necessarily. How does that work?
Yeah, I think that healthy industries create healthy companies and vice versa. So if you look, by means of example, at the airline industry benefits by having what I'll call points of unification within the industry. It benefits everybody when air travel is safe. It benefits everybody when flights are reasonably on time, right? Like there are certain things that you don't want to differentiate on. You want everybody in the industry to do them really, really well. And then you want to differentiate competitively on things like customer service or experience, or in the case of an airplane, maybe the type of airplane or the size of the seat, right? Those are the sorts of things where it makes sense to compete heavily and compete strongly. But you want the industry as a whole to be healthy so that customers are really confident in the products and services that they receive with whatever brand they're going to go with. So I think you always want to think about what are the points of unification in the industry where you can be a leader in terms of maybe it's safety, maybe it's distribution, maybe it's a sustainable supply chain, whatever that might look like. How can the industry as a whole have a greater impact on the communities that it serves and on the world at large in a meaningful way that keeps it a positive industry for everybody?
That is obvious, but profound at the same time. Like you don't think about it that way. It happens with politicians, for example. We just got out of election. Let's talk about that. If all the most of the politicians are not honest, then everybody looks like they're dishonest.
That's right.
Or if people are corrupt, then you look like you're corrupt and nothing can get accomplished. So you need that healthy environment so that things can get done, and then you differentiate yourself with ideas.
Yep, exactly.
Wouldn't that be great if we could implement it in that world?
Yeah, I think, Sarah, that's such a powerful example, right? If we could assume that all politicians were honest and were working in our best interest, then they could differentiate from each other based on their policies and their ideas and the kinds of programs that they would like to implement. And then as intelligent people, we would be able to sort of sort that out and put things next to each other in a column and say, which one do we want, right? But the clutter that's created by the accusations and the assumptions of negativity, it makes it difficult for anyone to cut through and to be able to have clarity around what they're actually trying to deliver.
Well, nobody believes you, and then you have to argue about things that aren't really the issues you stand for, but you're arguing it and taking all your airtime on things that are side issues because, it spirals out of control.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so what else have you found by putting this book out? What have you found has been the biggest or the most profound changes and results and feedback that you've gotten from people?
I think one of the most profound pieces of feedback that we've gotten is that the ideas that we present are actually fairly simple, but they're not simplistic. To say you need to elevate your perspective, right? You need to, as a human being, as an individual in an organization, make the choice to know what's going on in your broader company as well as in your market. Go out and learn. Be curious. Those are things that we know we should do, but sometimes you just really need that reminder, right? Like, that it's critically important to deal with the speed and transparency that we have in terms of disruption in today's environment. Same thing with elevating your relationships. Like, I can't tell you how often I go in and talk to clients and they haven't really met anybody new in a very long time, unless they're a salesperson and they're meeting prospects every day. But even those relationships they're not deep relationships, right? So, how do we as individuals take responsibility to say, I've got to get out there. I've got to be engaging with different people, with different viewpoints, people outside of my immediate team or my immediate group, so that I can understand the disruption and I can not fear it, but be excited about it and be curious about it. We get that by engaging with other people. So again, it's not incredibly profound necessarily to say we need to elevate our relationships, but it has a profound impact when you do it.
Well, I think that goes farther. We talked about this at this panel that I moderated on, the future of innovation 10 to 20 years out. And what was said over and over from the different inventions and innovations that have coming forward is that much of the new paradigms and innovations come from outside of your field, because your view of the world is, without trying to be, you're in a box. Your paradigm is kind of set in, and everybody around you sees things the same way. And it takes somebody outside that arena to see things differently, and that's where innovations occur. And it's continually like that in all industries. And so the only way you're going to be able to really innovate on a regular basis is to get out of that arena on a regular basis.
Absolutely. You need to, with intention and purpose, make time for yourself and for people on your team too. If you're in a leadership role, you should be making time for your team to explore other parts of the business, other parts of the industry, and to know what's going on more broadly.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, how can people get your book? It's such you've touched on a topic that's just so timely with the disruption and the massive change going on. Having something that people can read and think about and, reflect about on how to deal with all this innovation, how to create a model for your company to be able to innovate. And so it's so timely. How can people get a hold of your book? Is it sold everywhere fine books are sold?
Pretty much. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Most of the Hudson bookstores in the airports are carrying it. A number of local bookstores too. And then it's also available on Audible.
Well, excellent. And I'll have a link to your website on the radio page. And I thank you so much for coming. It's a really great topic and it's timely. It's a perfect thing to talk about right now.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. It's been a pleasure. And thanks for asking some really interesting questions.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed the discussion on disruption and hopefully got some ideas on how to change your outlook or change your company or organization to be more competitive as we go into the future. And I just want to remind you to not be fearful of the change that's coming. Figure out how to make it work for you and figure out how to embrace it in your own personal life. Otherwise, life will be disappointing because we cannot stop the change that's occurring. All we can do is figure out how to swim upstream and make sure it works for us. So I hope everybody truly has a wonderful day and has a wonderful Thanksgiving week with your family and friends.
You've been listening to Business Game Changers with host Sarah Westall. Tune in each Monday at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, as Sarah brings you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Tune in Mondays at 12 noon Pacific Time and learn more about Sarah at sarahwestall.com today.